Okay, our case study was on religious groups and cults and the vile difference between both. My name is Jason Fuentes.
I'm Marcelino Marquez.
My name is Katie Contreras.
And I am Donovan Mendes Revolurio.
Okay, so let's jump into it. Our case study was about what is the difference between a religion and a cult. To understand this question, we need to first understand the definition of both. So, what is a religion? A religion is practices, beliefs, and values that often focus on a higher power or an ultimate reality, which they have faith in and they worship. So human beings have relation to that which they regard holy, sacred, or absolute. They usually include moral codes to live by and guide the action of followers, as well as rituals such as prayer, meditation, reading sacred texts, and building community with other believers around them. Religion also emphasizes personal and spiritual growth through these practices. But foremost, at the center of all religions is the belief of something supernatural and transcendent. This can be a god, gods, or other supreme forces. Additionally, religions often answer questions such as why are we here, what happens after death, and what is the purpose of life? And lastly, religions are diverse with thousands and thousands of different systems across the world. Each of them hold a unique interpretation of their traditions and spirituality. So this plays an important role in shaping cultures, identities, and building norms. Now, what is a cult? A cult is also known as a high control group. It's also defined that way, and it is defined to have an unconventional belief system. So they are considered outside the norm and do not conform with religious expectations. They often include new or unique interpretations of rituals and spirituality, and they have unorthodox teachings. So cults usually revolve around the leader who are seen to have a lot of authority, and the members may feel inspired to, without a question, without a doubt, do whatever the leader says. Cults also often have an us versus them mentality, um, which means they see outsiders as critics or enemies. So this creates paranoia and fear about people outside the group. One thing I will say is the word cult can also be used to describe groups that are viewed as dangerous or manipulative, which can also be controversial. So it's controversial because in some cases groups are labeled as cults when they legitimately may see themselves as religious movements. So there's a very fine line between cults and religion, so it can be blurry sometimes and it depends on context, but let's get into it. So the difference between a cult and a religion. So the distinction between a cult and a religion can be somewhat subjective and often depends on perspective, but there are a few key factors that are typically considered when this like distinguishing between both. And one key factor is the legitimacy behind the group is taken into account. So religion is typically more structured and organized with frameworks such as old texts and rituals that happen over years. And cults, on the other hand, rely more on their leaders and new personal beliefs, which also ties in another key factor, which is duration. Duration is also important. Cults may be new or temporary, while on the other hand, religions are persistent through the years and it's a movement that happens over years. And if a cult is persistent through years, it may gradually transition into a recognizable religion. So a major difference between the both is also the control over their members. So cults are known for having psychological control over their members, which can lead to manipulation or exploitation. And on the other hand, religion, they let you leave whenever you want. You make your own decision. And lastly, social acceptance is a very important key factor in distinguishing the difference between both. So religions tend to be larger and more established in society, while again, cults are seen as outside the norm. So in conclusion, a cult may transition to a religion when it gains a bigger following or establishes formal structure and becomes more integrated into society.
After getting a better understanding of what religion is and what a cult is, let's take a deeper look as to why people join these types of groups. To begin, I think it's very important that I mention Schutzfiro, which stands for the Fundamental Interpersonal Relationship Orientation. It was developed by psychologist William Scutts in the 1950s. This is something we went over in the beginning of class, in the very beginning of semester. And I quote, Schutz explains that we use groups to belong and identify with others, find openness, and exercise power over others and our environment, found on page 5 of our textbook. The first part explains the need for inclusion. The person wants to feel like they belong and matter. The second part explains the need for affection. The person wants to be liked and see that they are cared for. And the third part explains the need for control. The person likes power and directing others, and we can clearly see all three of these in these two groups. And now I'm going to discuss why people join religious groups. According to the American Psychological Association, or APA, I quote, religion may fill the human need for finding meaning. Religion has survived and thrived for more than 100,000 years. It exists in every culture, with more than 85% of the world's population embracing some sort of religious belief. Researchers who study the psychology and neuroscience of religion found that we have cognitive tendencies to seek order from chaos and to believe the world around us was created for our use. Religion has survived for so long because it is being held together by common beliefs. We tend to search for meaning in our lives. It allows people to live in large cooperative societies, and the use of religion as a social tool explains its staying power. It allows people to be more humane by believing in a supernatural agent. And early religions used rituals such as restricting certain foods like pork and wearing clothes to denote modesty and to publicly demonstrate their moral concerns. Those rituals helped unite people and allowed them to live together cooperatively. These are just some examples of religious practice. Now I'm going to discuss why people join cults. According to the California State University East Bay, there are many common misconceptions about why people join cults. A few of these misconceptions are because they're too stupid, brainwashed, weak-minded, need to be told what to do, and many more. Despite all of this misinformation, according to some studies found in Laurel L. Dawson's book, the sociology, of new religious movements, cult members seem to fit a similar demographic, and some common characteristics they seem to share are higher level of education, higher financial success, a weaker spiritual background, and young age. Studies have found that people joining new religious movements are marked better educated than the public. This is because people pursuing degrees are more likely to be open-minded, so they take the time to actually process ideas they hear and decide whether they agree or disagree with it. People who join cults need to have, and I quote, a willingness to study and a lack of fear in the face of unfamiliar concepts and language, according to Dawson, found on page 88. That way the cult will be able to grow and thrive. In most cases, people who join cults have more money and have higher financial status, as they typically come from the middle or upper middle class households. They have more freedom to pursue outside interests. And Dawson also talks about a concept called religious seekership, which essentially refers to the action of a person seeking some religious or spiritual influence. And people who join cults typically have less spiritual upbringings, as it's easier to convince someone who doesn't know anything about a subject than it is to change a person's mind. And young adults searching for their own personal identity are also more likely to join cults because they are in a transitional period and are struggling to form a sense of belonging. They have the need for love, affection, and belongingness, and are more likely to give their time and devote to the cult.
So I will be talking about leaders and the leaders' impact and influence surrounding the cult groups. Leadership plays a crucial role in shaping both cults and religions, but the effects of leadership in each differ significantly in their impact on followers, societal perception, and long-term influence. While both structures rely on charismatic authority to attract and maintain its followers. The nature of their leadership determines whether they foster stability and personal growth or manipulation and control. The differences, one major difference between a cult and religious leadership lies in their approach to authority and power. As said by the U.S. Department of State, these leaders, whether priests, imams, rabbis, or pastors, often work within long-standing traditions that encourage interpretation, dialogue, and moral accountability. Religious leaders typically operate within an established framework that promotes ethical guidelines, spiritual growth, and communal well-being. In contrast, cult leaders tend to centralize and create power around themselves, often demanding absolute loyalty and discouraging dissent through their charm. Common personality traits that are held by charismatic leaders are narcissism, lack of morality, and psychopathy, uh, as cited by Paul and Williams, 2002, as cited in Denridge. Their leadership frequently hinges on control through fear, isolation, or psychological manipulation, making the followers dependent on their leader's guidance. And here are my sources. How religious leaders guide and influence members. Religions often encourage followers to develop personal faith and critical thinking within a structured belief system that has survived generations. As stated by Plante, religion and spirituality allow people a framework for nurturing a sense of mission and vocation in life. Plante 2008. Religious groups are formed with each member in pursuit to reinforce their belonging and quality of life, um, and are able to achieve that goal successfully through the group's leadership. The leader roles of religious groups provide cohesion to the collective through their traditional rituals, community support, and moral teachings, because it fulfills the members' purpose for being in the group. Evidence of how leaders and members of religious groups have achieved benefits that have developed into the cohesion between each other are the following statements. In the first statement, Janelle teachings, she explains that what she learned from the church, she uses it in her life. Thanks to her leaders at church who teach her these values, she fulfills her goals of doing well for herself and doing well for others. In the second example, Lori emphasizes that her purpose for continuing to partake in Jewish traditions is to feel connected to something greater. Therefore, through the conductance of her religious leaders in her Jewish group, she can fulfill her need to be felt like she's included and important. Cult leader influence. Conversely, cult leaders foster an us versus them mentality that discourages questioning and guides members into destroying themselves for their leader. When cult leadership is exposed for manipulation or abuse, it can lead to public distrust, legal intervention, and in extreme cases, tragic consequences, such as the events of Jonestown. To clarify in a brief summary, the University of Texas Permian Basin of Jonestown case states that the Reverend Jim Jones was the founder of the cult, the People's Temple, and he had a lot of these cults situated around California until they migrated and settled in Guyana. They then established the Jonestown Commune, where it tragically ended in a mass suicide of 900 people. Such methods that were used to keep these people in his crazy cult were to establish these methods provided by Dittman from the American Psychology Association. What is happening? Okay. The first method was Big Brother is watching you. The other was self-incrimination, suicide drills, and distorting people's perception. The first one was a bombardment of constant reminders that Jim Jones is watching over them through speakers built along all parts of the commune. This was his way of reminding the people that he had them under his thumb and he was basically their god, and they had to follow under him. Number two was self-incrimination, where he forcefully gained private information from the members of the cult in order to use that against them if he ever saw them fall out of line trying to escape. He shows that he lacks morality and would rather not have anybody leave him, so he will manipulate them by using their weaknesses. Number three, suicide drills. He drilled in the idea that it's better to kill yourself rather than get captured if there was a time of war by the enemy. This shows that he really loves the power that this position gives him in this group, and he would rather have everybody else die than lose them. And number four, distorting people's perception. Jones enforced that his followers give him thanks for whatever he does. This was just a way of stroking his ego and brainwashing his members over time that to think that they really do need him and that they would not be anything without him in the group. And that concludes my part.
In the end, many people would choose to leave a religious group or a cult, but unfortunately, both do not have the same outcome. For example, the National Library of Medicine reveals that former cult members experience an in-between time in the period after leaving the cult and find themselves in a confusing, chaotic state. Now, this is due for multiple reasons, which will be explained later. In terms of religious group, members leave for personal reasons or for not wanting to be involved no longer. And this is from the American Psychological Association. For many, leaving the cult has psychological and physical impacts. Some describe their time in the cult as a time when they lost their identity and personality, whereas in the religious group, members do not experience any consequences whatsoever. Now, this is due to the fact that many people who join a religious group are looking for a religious group are just looking for a shared community that share the same beliefs and ideas among the religious groups. For people with cults, many people choose to join cults because they are experiencing a vulnerable time, either economically, emotionally, or even spiritually. And also, many people who join cults are just looking to have that sense of belonging in the group, which makes them one of the reasons why leaving the cult is hard for them, is because they are looking for a sense of belonging in the group, and also the vulnerability makes it hard for them to leave the group or to leave the cult. Now, for religious groups, members have free will to leave and also are not obligated or mandated to stay within the group by the leader. Many religious leaders are aware that the members have outside responsibilities and they are not obligated to stay within the religious group at all. And also, members are there to share their beliefs and ideas rather than being influenced by the leader. And also, and also, many people in religious groups are within the group to have that sense of belonging in the group and to share a common idea or a common belief within other members. However, cult members are forced to commit or obey the leader, and members find it extremely difficult to leave. And oftentimes, many people who leave cults have a traumatic experience, unlike religious groups. Now, the reason for this is because many people in cults are controlled or have little to no decision making within the cult by the religious leader. The reason for this because many cults take advantage of vulnerable people that join the cult, and also many people who are in the cult find it extremely difficult to leave because, as I mentioned, many people are controlled by the cult, and and many cult leaders make it impossible for people to leave because they often indoctrinate their members with false beliefs or ideas, and also many people feel threatened to leave as well. In the end, in the end, leaving a cult and religious group are completely different, and ultimately, there are some major differences between the two, and many people should realize the differences between the two before it's too late.
And now for our final thoughts.
So, what I picked up from learning about cults and religion, that it was interesting that it is a very fine line between the difference between both. And something that kept sticking out to me was cults can gradually transition to religions. Like it's all a matter of perspective, and it's up for interpretation because, like I said, cults is just a term that people use when they see something outside of the norm, or when they think, or when they deem like something violent, you know? And it can be confusing because they the groups, the social movements can see themselves as religion. So that's something that stood out to me when I was doing research, and It's also interesting to see like the background of when they exit, like the consequences of the of exiting like cults and the difference between entering a cult and a religion and like exiting and a cult and a religion.
Yeah, and after all the research I collected on these two groups, I also think they share like more similarities than differences. Without a doubt, people join both these groups to belong and identify with others, as they probably might not have had this before joining. They both revolve around faith and believing, and I feel as though cults care more about the need for affection than religion. Of course, both groups want to know that they are cared for and liked, but I feel as though those who are in cults will do anything in their power to make sure that they're liked by the leader, as in do anything that the leader may ask of them, no matter if it's extreme or outrageous. And I feel as though cults definitely have a higher need for control than religion. As we've heard, cults are usually more strict and controlling and don't allow their members to think for themselves. Meanwhile, people in religion have the freedom to come and go. And as someone who has been religious their whole life and grew up in a Christian church, I was intrigued to learn why people join. I've been going to my church since I was born, so I couldn't really make that decision on my own like other people. And during COVID, I actually stopped going to church. And it was interesting to compare my situation to the situation of someone who was trying to leave a cult, as I didn't have any trouble or consequences for doing so, which is a major difference between the two. And then after 3 years of not going, I started to attend again, which is something that a person who came from a cult wouldn't be able to do. Um, Religion and cults are something that will continue to grow and prosper, and there's nothing we can do to get rid of them. And instead of acting like they don't exist, we should educate ourselves on the differences.
I agree that we should educate ourselves on the differences. I think the most important part to acknowledge about what groups we join is taking a look at the group dynamics of cults and religions. We notice that in cults, there tends to be one person that's very controlling, and usually, if we know about the Pharaoh theory, we know that there is a control section in the Pharaoh, and if we identify that as a strong trait in a leader of the group, it might be best idea to not join that group or not commit yourself completely to it. I also think that's important to be aware about your current situation to make sure that you're not being taken advantage of because of the des of how desperate you might be.
In the end, cults should be closely monitored because of the danger they present to society. After conducting much research, it is clear that cults bring much danger to individuals based on their traumatizing experience and also by the effects they have on many people. And also, many people who join religious cults, cults, are often looking for that spiritual, economic, physical, or even emotional breakthrough. However, when they join a cult, they're often a time of vulnerability in their lives, and many cult leaders take advantage of them. It is clear that cult members are just looking to recruit more and more people for their own personal gain and to get a higher sense of power or influence over their members. In the end, cult leaders are often just looking for their own personal gain, and also it can be argued that many people in society can say that cults can operate as secretive pyramid schemes. In the end, cult members, cults should be closely monitored, and also they can make society vulnerable, and also many people are not aware of the signs of a cult. Many people should realize the signs of a cult versus a religious group, and should be protected no matter what, because they should not be taken advantage of. And also, ultimately, cults cults should not be allowed in society, and they should be closely monitored by the U.S. government to avoid any other atrocity or to not have anyone suffer in a cult. And also, many people should be aware of what they're going into and how to differentiate religious groups and cults to see how they can protect themselves. And also, they should see how many cults are just looking for another person to recruit.
And these are our works cited, and thank you for your attention.